Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Like Austin said, my name is Sarah Hayes. I'm Director of Innovation and Workforce Development for the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. And in this July iteration of our Clearance Preparedness program, I'm very pleased to present and introduce to you Dr. Charles Clancy. I'll give a little bit of a bio and then I'm going to let him take over. Charles Clancy is the Senior Vice President at MITRE and heads MITRE Labs. In addition, Dr. Clancy also serves as MITRE's Chief Futurist, working to realize a future where emerging technology is democratic, sustainable, and equitable. Before joining MITRE in 2019 as Vice President for Intelligence Programs, Dr. Clancy served as the Bradley Distinguished Professor of Cybersecurity in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Virginia Tech and Executive Director of the Hume Center for National Security and Technology, which is a point of interest how we became acquainted when he hired me for my first role within what is now CCI. So we go back. There he also led, it's important to note that he led Virginia Tech's research and experiential learning programs in defense and intelligence. And he started his career at the National Security Agency, filling a variety of research and engineering roles with a focus on wireless communications. He was named a fellow of the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, for his work in information security and digital communications, and elected a member of the Virginia Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. He's co-authored more than 250 academic publications and patents, as well as 6 books. He co-founded 5 venture-backed startup companies that apply commercial innovation to the intersection of telecommunications and national security. He sits on a number of boards, committees, and advisory boards for academic institutions. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, a master's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a doctorate in computer science from the University of Maryland, College Park. So again, I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Charles Clancy, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to see events like this. I was involved in the very early days of CCI, helping get the original legislation written that ultimately funded it, and then working with universities across the whole state, really, to try and help get the original blueprint put together. And I think for about 6 months, I was the interim executive director of CCI as the team worked to try and to do an international search and identify ultimately Luis de Silva, who joined and really became the first permanent director of CCI. So CCI always is sort of an important part of my own history at Virginia Tech, and I think it's awesome to see how much it's grown and all the different activities it's engaged in. I kind of get to see through some of the social media posts and so forth. I guess in conversations with Eric Berger and others around this whole notion of clearance preparedness, I think there's already been a handful of seminars by folks talking about really kind of the nuts and bolts of what it means to fill out the necessary security paperwork to get a clearance, all the things you should and shouldn't be doing in order to sort of obtain and be eligible and maintain a security clearance. So I guess I don't want to talk too much about that because I gather much of that's been covered in prior conversations. I guess I wanted to focus the conversation a little bit more on my experience as someone who went through that process and had a government career in cybersecurity with the National Security Agency. And to kind of give you a perspective of, if you're willing to go through all the hoops and hurdles of getting and maintaining a clearance, what kinds of career opportunities might be available to you on the other side of that. And then certainly can talk about MITRE and all the stuff that we do in cyber as well. So I started my journey in cybersecurity long before it was called cybersecurity, back in the early days of the internet. I guess not super early days, really the days of the commercially accessible internet in the early 1990s. As a high school student who loved computers and was sort of fascinated by I guess sort of the emerging hacking culture of the late 80s and early 90s. This got me into a fair bit of trouble in school through middle school and high school. I remember my first trip to the principal's office was in 7th grade because I had, quote, hacked my teacher's computer in the classroom. I was in a magnet school program that had computers in the classroom, and these were very like black and white monitor, very old computers, like 2 floppy disk drives, no hard drives in them, right? These were I don't know, 286 era computers, and of the early 1990s. And I landed in the principal's office because I wanted to print something, and only the teacher's computer had a printer. So I fire up the teacher's computer. It then prompts me for a password, which I easily bypass by just hitting Control-C on the keyboard, and the computer continues to boot. And I print out my document. The teacher then discovers what I have done and is very upset that I have invaded the privacy of her computer and have quote, hacked her, and I get sent to the principal's office, which was an interesting experience in 7th grade. This wasn't my last trip to the principal's office for inappropriate computer activities as I was going through high school. As I started in high school, the computer networks for my high school system were all networked together with Novell NetWare, which was a old networking technology. But I spent 11th grade thoroughly hacking the entire school system, to the point where I found myself with access to all the school system payroll data, and the system automatically shut down because it had detected my unauthorized access to payroll information for the school system. I then let's see, and then towards the mid to late 90s, I discovered my mother was taking part-time classes at a local university, and I discovered I could access their systems through a dial-up modem at the time, and used all the same skills I had on my high school system on the local university system. And I had a very interesting watershed moment in my own life when I was I think 17 years old, and I had discovered that I had gotten administrative access to the ambulance server for the hospital that was attached to the university. And I figured this is the sort of thing that could land me in jail, and not something that's really a fun hobby anymore. And that I kind of had 2 paths in terms of the directions I could go with my life, with misdeeds on the internet. And I made the very deliberate decision at 17 to stop being a black hat and figure out how to sort of shape my interest in cybersecurity into something positive, because otherwise, like I said, a lot of people that were part of that community in the 90s became major targets of the FBI and ended up in prison, right? And that was not, I think, a good career trajectory for anyone, especially those here on the call. So I started college, and in college found my way to the head of the computer science department's office, and within about 30 minutes of chatting, he offered me a job as a systems administrator for the computer science department's lab network, which for me was this sort of amazing opportunity to take all this knowledge I'd been gaining about computer systems and put it to positive use. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't have a rocky collegiate experience. I was almost expelled from college for things that were judged as violations of my college's computer use policy. In fact, my senior year of college, my last semester, I had all of my computer accounts suspended by Central IT because of some of the things that I had done. Of course, the irony was that I was also the IT admin for both the computer science and math departments. So while I didn't have a standard user account that I could log into for like my student email anymore, I did have full administrative access to two of the largest sort of department lab networks on campus. But again, it was a very interesting question of, do I want to continue what I was doing, which I felt strongly about, really having sort of, and again, a little background on that incident. I had built a sort of an early version of a social network. This was, again, right around the late 90s again, before Facebook, before MySpace, before all these other things. I had taken the school's student ID database, which was unprotected, and I'd combined that with the class roster information that was also insufficiently protected, and built basically a website where anybody could go and see photos of their classmates and pull up campus directory information about them, see their class schedule, and built all these fun tools into it for helping students find each other. And it became it kind of became this idea of what, when I finally saw the Social Network, right, the movie with that sort of showed the rise of Facebook. It was sort of eerie because many of the things that Mark Zuckerberg had done at Harvard in his dorm room were the exact same things I did 5 years earlier in my dorm room. But again, it was I made the deliberate decision to stop being the troublemaker, and basically built an enterprise version of that same system for the school to use in an official capacity, with privacy protections built in, and I think left the university on a positive note, not expelled, right? So I guess my point is that you'll find in the world of cybersecurity, there's sort of the good side and the dark side, and if you find yourself going in the wrong direction, I think it's an important thing to sort of step back and say, is this the direction I want to be going? How can I be using my skills productively and positively, and make the deliberate decision to sort of shift back in the right direction? Otherwise, and your life can take a very different trajectory than perhaps you expected. And all of these skills are what found me a summer internship at the National Security Agency, again, in the late 90s. I had seen the movie Enemy of the State, starring Will Smith. He was being chased around by NSA. They were the bad guys in the movie. And in the movie, Seth Green and Jack Black were the two NSA technicians who were in the white panel van, sort of chasing Will Smith around. And when I saw that movie, I was like, I want to be those guys when I grow up. So I immediately that summer applied for an internship at the National Security Agency, and got in. So I as part of that, had to go through, of course, the security clearance process. And I was still, I think I was 19 at the time, going through the whole clearance process. And this, of course, was before 9/11. And so the process, well, much of the process today is the same as it was back then. Although, I don't know, things like social media are much bigger factors than they were, 25 years ago when I was doing it. But again, fill out my SF-86, submit it, don't hear for months and months and months, and no idea what the status of my application is. Finally get a conditional job offer, and then hope that my clearance processing can get done on time. Was flown out to Fort Meade to do psychological testing, a full scope polygraph with both the lifestyles questions and the counterintelligence questions. I think it's interesting, the first time you go through a polygraph, the counterintelligence questions are easy because you've never had access to classified information. So when they ask you questions about sharing I don't know, classified information with unauthorized parties and things like that, those are all easy to answer because you've never been in a situation where that would be something that you would do. The lifestyle polygraph, though, is a lot more interesting, particularly for a college student. And I kind of had so given I had sort of applied for this as a freshman, almost, I think it was a freshman. It must have been close to a freshman. I made sure I sort of stayed on the straight and narrow when it came to things like drug use and alcohol use in college. And it actually was kind of interesting during my polygraph when I was 19 years old. The polygrapher refused to believe I had never tried marijuana, for example, and so it was an interesting conversation. But I guess my advice to everyone, if going through those experiences, is to just be honest. I think sort of different agencies have different policies. I think much of the intelligence community has softened their stance. I know for a long time the FBI still had a fairly zero tolerance policy around certain drug use, but many of the other agencies have softened that, as long as, I don't know, you're not still a habitual user. If it's something that's in your past or something you tried once, it's really not a big deal. Again, as long as you're honest and share that information with the investigators. Yeah, but then I finished my clearance processing, and 2 months later found myself as an intern at the National Security Agency, where I was doing penetration testing on new products that were being developed for specific national security applications. And I would say it was an amazing experience. Much of my experience in cybersecurity had been focused on network security, and in particular, kind of as you deploy a network and you put the necessary security around it and the appropriate infrastructure to be able to do threat detection and be able to track and monitor incidents, recognize when you've been hacked, know how to deal with that. Much of the lens through which you're experiencing that is really more as a systems administrator. But going to NSA, I saw sort of this much different side of cybersecurity. It was, how do you actually design a firewall, not how do you deploy and configure a firewall. It's how do you design a firewall that will withstand a variety of different kinds of attacks. So it really helped me understand the difference between kind of a more IT focused career, which is really about deploying, designing networks, deploying and managing those networks and the systems that make up those networks. It's very different than designing, I don't know, the next generation of things that could go into such a network. And so again, my first summer at NSA really helped me better understand that whole world. And it was a great experience. And then I continued going back every summer as I worked my way through my master's and PhD. Every summer I would go back for an internship in a different office at NSA, just to kind of get a wide range of experiences doing different things. I did a summer in research, which I found fascinating. It was really about designing algorithms that could identify cyber threats in large amounts of data. And that really kind of understand the difference between engineering and research, right? My journey was really IT to engineering and then engineering to research, and really understanding what that role was like. And then I went kind of the opposite direction. I spent a summer working in a field support office. Summer of 2003, we were 2 months into the Iraq invasion, and I was in an office that was mostly deployed to Iraq with the military as part of the invasion. And that was a whole fascinating other side of cybersecurity, to kind of see the offensive cyber operations in the field and kind of what that meant. And all of those experiences, I think, really then shaped me as my career through NSA after as I completed my PhD and began working there full time. As a PhD, I went back into research. Right, the whole point of getting a PhD is so you've got kind of the necessary set of experiences in order to really be an effective researcher. And so. But as a researcher, I was always focused not only on just designing a hypothetical proof of concept theoretical thing, but also understanding the engineering aspects of that if it were successful, and then from there being able to field it. And again, at the time, this period between 9/11 and the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq, the National Security Agency was spending a lot of time on counterterrorism threats and the global war on terror. And much of the research I was doing were things that were directly driving interest from the field. Let me pause there and say, certainly, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. I'm happy to sort of answer them along the way. And then we can kind of go back and forth. Let's see. So I'd say my trajectory at NSA was then heavily influenced by a handful of trips to Iraq at the height of the war. It was really interesting to see really this bridge between kind of really what a really smart group of technical people can do if they're not sort of cloistered off in research and isolated from kind of all of the operational needs of the organization. But you take that really high performing technical team, actually put them into that operational environment. And it was sort of amazing to see, because instead of this very slow feedback loop where people in the field identify a problem, they send it back to the US for engineers to think about. Those engineers say, well, in order to solve this problem, we need to design these new things. Let's go talk to the researchers. The researchers design the thing. The engineers will paint it green. And then eventually it'll find its way back out to the field. Right, that end-to-end process can take months to years, depending on the nature of the technical problem. But if you take those researchers and put them in the field, right, you have this very fast feedback loop where you can have a significant impact on the mission. And my own experience in doing that, it was just kind of incredible to see real-time results of sort of doing research in real time to solve real problems. As part of my overall career, it's something I'm very glad I had the opportunity to do. One of the questions from the audience here is a question to think about certs. I assume that's cybersecurity certs. I actually never got any of the certs. Things like Security Plus, Net Plus, any of the Cisco or Microsoft certs, CISSP, for example. I never did any of those, and I think it highly depends on the agency you're going to and the role and the mission that you have in that agency. So within NSA, I was primarily research and operations. I was not managing any kind of enterprise network. Right, I was trying to exploit the bad guys' networks, and so the certs, a lot of those certs don't really apply. Right, there is no black hat cert. Right, there's no nation state APT hacker cert that's really kind of part of the current ecosystem anyway. And so certainly, I think the folks that were part of sort of the enterprise security team who are focused on securing NSA's enterprise infrastructure. Those folks, and particularly the contractors that supported them, had those certs. But I'd say the engineers and researchers focused on the offensive mission of the agency generally did not have those certs because they don't quite apply in the same way. I do think that if you're interested in getting into a job in government, in cyber, they are very useful things to have on your resume. Particularly in the contractor world, it's useful because a lot of the contractors are trying to meet in their contracts. They have minimum qualification requirements for people at different levels that would bill against their contract, and so there's often a requirement that you have a CISSP, for example, and oftentimes the government contract folks will just put that in as a requirement, not really thinking through whether or not you actually need it, or whether the job would necessitate it, or whether it's going to limit the contractor's ability to find qualified talent because they're putting an arbitrary cert requirement in there. But it always helps, I would say, particularly if you're interested in going to work for one of the big IT services contractors, because it gives them more options and gives you more options around which projects you work on, because some of them do have cert requirements. I found that on the government side, the government doesn't always follow their own rules. And so a lot of the civilians or military that are working in similar capacities for the agencies may not have the same certs that the contractors are required to have because of these contractual requirements. So it's kind of a mixed answer, I guess, in terms of how valuable they are. I think it really has to do with the nature of the work you want to do. And the more into research you are, the less it's necessary. A PhD is way more valuable than a CISSP in terms of getting a research position. In engineering, again, I think in many cases a master's degree is going to be a lot more valuable than a CISSP. But if you want to do, if you're more in the IT enterprise network security or administration part of the mission, there a CISSP is way more valuable than a bachelor's degree. So it just kind of depends on where in the ecosystem you're interested in working, or you find yourself sort of from a career perspective. Let's see. So sort of continuing with my journey, again, feel free to add questions in the Q&A that I'll answer along the way. As I got more and more involved in the field environment, I decided to do a full deployment. So in 2009, I deployed to Iraq as I had some innocuous title like Special Projects Officer, I think it was. But really my job was to lead the offensive cyber operations for the NSA in Iraq against Al-Qaeda and all the other related bad guys that we were concerned about. And that was not an experience that you could ever really prepare for. I mean, relative at the time I was I don't know, I had my PhD for a few years, was used to running research projects, working with universities, collaborating with national labs and research centers. And I find myself in a war zone with I don't know, a rifle, a handgun, a backpack full of random network cables and connectors, a thumb drive with NSA's most sophisticated malware on it, and $1.3 million in $100 bills in a briefcase, right? It was the most absurd combination of things I could have ever imagined. Not something you're really prepared for until you are sort of experiencing it firsthand, I would say. And I think it's kind of interesting because I don't know that it's even possible to have that kind of experience anymore, given the way our national security apparatus has shifted focus to China. China is a very different environment than Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq and Afghanistan, we kind of had a run of the place, and so it was a very permissive environment for conducting all kinds of field operations. China is not like China is a very closed environment, and the U.S. has much less access to it. So the sorts of things that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan would never be possible in terms of, or I mean, if they would just be much riskier and require dramatically more planning and a lot more risk assessment than the same sorts of operation that you could do in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I know I'm, to a certain extent, I had this narrow window where I kind of got to live the dream of satisfying all of my wildest dreams, the teenager version of me getting sent to the principal's office, getting to do these things for my country in a war zone, and it was a really cool experience. After that, I came back, and I had swung my career so far into the sort of adrenaline end of the spectrum. It was hard to maintain that. I know a lot of people I know that did that work full time as their career. Most of them had gotten married and gotten divorced, had all kinds of it's just not a sustainable spot to be at in terms of work-life balance, mental health, a whole bunch of things. And so I I personally swung back pretty dramatically the opposite direction, and became a professor at Virginia Tech. That's when I joined Virginia Tech in 2010, and then took the lead of the Hume Center to really launch it as it was forming, and then the opportunity to think about sort of the next generation and sort of their experiences in cybersecurity. Let's see, at Virginia Tech, I'd say one of my interesting experiences really was, for several years, I was the faculty advisor to the cybersecurity student club, which was kind of cool because all the students that were part of that club very much reminded me of me when I was in college, and I think the club provide at least at the time, it provided a very useful forum for students to come together and talk about cybersecurity, practice cybersecurity in a constructive environment, right? That isn't using the university network as target practice, basically, because again, those are the sorts of things that can get you into big trouble. As I think about really what's needed and the opportunities that things like CCI really are helping provide, it's all that opportunity for experiential learning. A lot of the cybersecurity classes in computer science and computer engineering don't show up until your junior and senior year. And for folks that are really, I'd say, hobbyists and enthusiasts doing these things, those 2 years are important for making sure that you have yourself vectored in the right direction and don't end up in trouble. And so I think a lot of the student clubs and experiential learning in general are great ways to do that, whether it's undergraduate research, it's, I don't know, working as an intern for the campus IT organization. Those are all, I think, good outlets for getting engaged in those sorts of things. And then, of course, I spent 9 years at Virginia Tech, helped get CCI launched, and then joined MITRE. But there's a couple questions here in the Q&A box, and then we can come back to sort of my career trajectory and MITRE. Let's see. So easy question to answer. So somebody's asked if I was part of TAO at NSA. TAO is the Tailored Access Operations Unit that I think came into everyone's consciousness because of the Snowden leaks. And I'll say I was never employed by TAO, but when I was in research, TAO was my customer. A lot of the research I was doing was to develop technologies that TAO could then go operationalize and use in the field. And then when I was deployed in Iraq, TAO was my home office in back at Fort Meade. So I officially reported up through the sort of diplomatic chain in Baghdad, but all the work I was doing was on behalf of TAO. So a lot of NSA's internal organization, of course, has changed since TAO existed. It was really the sort of elite hacker unit within the organization previously, but now with what's called NSA 21 was a big reorganization they did, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and they sort of split things around. So there's now a directorate of capabilities and a directorate of operations within NSA, and TAO did both capability development and operationalization. It was a very vertically integrated organization. Develop the 0 days, develop the cyber tools, develop the infrastructure that could manage those, and then they also executed a lot of the requirements. I'm sorry, executed the missions as well. And so that tight coupling allowed sort of rapid iteration, but I guess had its own challenges as well, because there was a lot of not invented here syndrome where other parts of the agency were developing things that TAO might want to use. But if TAO wasn't building it in-house, then they didn't really care about it. And so as part of the reorganization, they took built a directorate of capabilities and separately a directorate of operations. So let's see, another question. Someone who is finishing a master's degree this coming semester don't feel prepared to work in the field. Any thoughts on building confidence? Well, I would say Well, one, the cybersecurity community in general, I think has issues with how welcoming it is. You can even see this on the InfoSec community on Twitter. There's a lot of gatekeeping that happens, I think, in the sort of broader community. I don't know if you would find that in any specific government agency that you would be working in, but I'd say the community as a whole, DEF CON, Black Hat, I think all of this, there's a bad reputation, I think, among sort of the established cyber people out there, and then kind of gatekeeping the next generation. And that has a really negative effect, I would say, on the cybersecurity community as a whole. It's been a huge problem for really women entering the field for the last 20 years, although I think there's been some considerable progress in the last, say, 5-ish years on making cyber a more inclusive environment for women and others. And I think the community as a whole recognizes that they need to really kind of change their attitude, be more focused on being welcoming and being a good mentor, because that's what's going to really attract the next generation to the field. In terms of sort of feeling qualified to go do these, kind of go work in one of these roles, I mean, I would say in my career, I have never felt qualified for any of the jobs I've ever had. When I got to Virginia Tech and suddenly found myself expected to launch a new research center at a university, there was no instruction manual for that. I was 29 years old and kind of just asked a lot of questions, found a mentor, did what I could to kind of figure it out as you go. And in many cases, I'd say that's a big part of all of this. And I think your confidence grows over time. I'd say any new job I go into, the first 3 months, I have zero confidence and I have no idea what's going on. By the time I get to the end of 3 months, I'd say, false confidence. I think I understand what's going on, and I think that I can confidently take action and know the right thing to do and the right thing to say. But it's not until 6 months in, I realized that the confidence I thought I had at 3 months was misplaced, because I really still didn't understand it. And it's not really until 6 months into any position that you really feel like, at least for me, that I really could act with confidence and know that I was doing the right thing, and that it's not necessarily that I was making different decisions at 3 months versus at 6 months, but at 6 months, I think I myself was sufficiently confident in the actions I was taking that it inspired others to follow those actions and accept those decisions in a way that a more tentative version of me at, I don't know, 1 to 3 months didn't have the confidence to back up, and led to situations where lots of people would then question what I was doing. Because if I don't think I know what I'm doing, then no one else will think that I know what I'm doing. And as a result, no one will necessarily do what I say, if you will. I mean, yeah, I faced that coming to Virginia Tech. I faced that coming to MITRE. At Virginia Tech, I was leading the HIM Center at the time. We were about, I don't know, 50 researchers and a few hundred students that were part of the program. Suddenly I get to MITRE, and I'm now responsible for, and at the time we were doing, like, I don't know, $10 million a year in grants, maybe $15 million a year in grants. When I get to MITRE, I'm now responsible for over $300 million a year in projects. I'm supposed to help every single agency in the entire intelligence community, like, go be awesome with technology. And I have 700 people reporting to me. And that was a pretty overwhelming transition, because I suddenly had, I don't know, probably 15x more people and 15x more responsibility in terms of program scale. And again, there's no training manual that says, if you got to manage 50 people, here's how you do it. If you got to manage 500 people, it's different. You got to do it like this. Like, there is no training manual, and you kind of have to find your way through it and build the confidence. And it can, like I said, it'll take 6 months, sort of my experience. And then a year later, MITRE goes through a small reorganization, and suddenly I find myself with over 4,000 people. And again, there's no training manual that says, here's how you manage if this is how you manage 700 people, here's how you manage 4,000 people, right? Again, you have to, and if you don't sort of put forward the confidence that you know what you're doing, then the team's not going to necessarily respect the things you're saying. So I think there's no easy answer to that. I know in a lot of different technology areas, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, that people experience. And because my only answer to that is I think it's natural. And I think that over time, it will abate, and your confidence will grow, and you'll be effective in your role. Let's see. Another question. Many prospective cybersecurity workers report struggling with bridging the gap between college, higher education, entering the workforce. Yeah, so I think it's sort of similar to the what I just described. What I would say is one of the biggest differences between doing cybersecurity in school versus doing it in the real world is we always talk about trying to build these hands-on cybersecurity curriculum, but in reality, the lab exercises that you're going to do as part of a class are not never going to prepare you for kind of a real world environment of what it means to do cybersecurity in the real world. Things that you can do to help better prepare you, I think, really all come back to experiential learning. So internships, I think, are really important because I know for me, they showed me sort of a dramatically different view on cyber than I got even from my work as a part-time systems administrator and as a student. I think getting involved in other kinds of experiential learning, like club activities, like capture the flag events, those also can be very helpful. Again, hacking into some virtualized environment to recover some digital flag is not quite the same as doing cybersecurity as a job, but it's closer than the lab exercises that you would do as part of a junior or senior level course. So I think those are very useful things that can help bridge. But again, nothing's going to entirely bridge it until you get there and really kind of experience it. And there's a fair amount of on-the-job training, I think, that really is necessary to kind of fully grasp what it means to do cybersecurity as a job. Let's see. Another question. Cyber operations or offense getting crowded over cybersecurity or defense, employees searching for more cyber. Yeah, so I would say, again, in terms of different careers, I characterized it broadly into research, engineering, and sort of IT operations. You also have offense versus defense, I would say. And at the research stage, they're, I think, a lot more blurred together in terms of offense versus defense. Certainly when you're in the operations end, they're very different, the sorts of things you would do if you're doing offense versus defense. In terms of the job market, there are a lot more jobs in defense than there are in offense because there are very few entities that are allowed to do offense. So you've got NSA, CIA, and US Cyber Command, and to a certain extent, FBI, who are the US federal agencies who have the legal authority to do offensive cyber operations. And their responsibilities are all a little bit different, right? So NSA is responsible for kind of large scale eavesdropping missions. And with respect to cyber, their goal is primarily for espionage. They want to hack into adversary systems to steal information. But again, their responsibility is exclusively for stealing information, not for, I don't know, making a power plant explode. And it's known as the CNE mission, or computer network exploitation. CIA and US Cyber Command have the offensive cyber mission for attack, but under different circumstances. So US Cyber Command can execute an offensive cyber attack against a foreign adversary if we are at some level of declared state of conflict. So the global war on terror is an ongoing congressionally sanctioned war that we are in that is sort of global. And so U.S. Cyber Command can do offensive cyber ops against terrorist targets and can do more than just steal information. They can do more destructive cyber attacks against their systems. And they use those authorities kind of right up to the edge. Things like going after ransomware groups. That's another example where U.S. Cyber Command can take action. I think it's been widely reported in the New York Times that, and I think Washington Post, that U.S. Cyber Command took offensive cyber actions against Russia in the lead up to the what was it, the 2020, 2016, 2018, I think it was the 2018 midterms and the 2020 elections, where they sought to disrupt the troll farms, if you will, that Russia was using. And then the CIA has a whole different set of authorities. They're able to do an offensive cyber attack if basically the National Security Council and the president approves it. So think more special ops types things that has less to do with us necessarily being in declared state of war with someone, which is cybercom's domain, and more about us doing some special ops type action somewhere in the world, then with approval from the what's called a finding, a presidential finding, CIA is able to do offensive cyber operations. And so there's, and then of course the FBI is also involved. They're mostly involved domestically for targeting criminal elements. So any sort of criminal cyber activity in the U.S., they have, if they have a warrant, they're able to execute some level of offensive cyber operations as part of a criminal investigation with a warrant. So if you want to do offensive cyber ops, those are kind of the only places you can do it. But every single agency in the entire federal government and every single company out there needs defensive cyber. So there's orders of magnitude more defensive jobs out there because everybody needs it. So if you're, I don't know, a Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service student, and you're thinking about potential careers in the federal government, it's more likely than not that you will end up in a defensive role just because there's a lot more of those roles out there. Again, unless you very specifically are interested in that ops role and an offensive role, in which case I would be very targeted in the agencies that you are looking to apply to, because there's only like really 4 of them out there that have the legal authority to do that. There's an interesting middle ground called active defense that a lot of more established companies are getting involved in. And these are things where you're kind of half active, half defensive, half offense, half defense in terms of the things that you're doing. So for example, here at MITRE, we have a whole program called adversary engagement, where we help organizations stand up honeypots, basically fake networks that adversaries will hack into. And by hacking into these fake networks, one, they're kind of like a tripwire, because the only people accessing those networks will be bad guys, because good guys would have no reason to go onto those networks. And so one, if you're being targeted, because sort of if you see someone trying to access one of these systems, then it's a tripwire within your network. But also, the more convincing the fake network is, the longer you can have your adversary expending resources trying to hack into something that has no value, no actual data in it. And so these used to be very hard to create, because creating convincing fake data was challenging. But we've seen in the last year all this generative AI come along, and now we're seeing all this new opportunity to basically use generative AI to create a hall of mirrors that you can trap adversaries in within your networks. And as they're trapped in that hall of mirrors, you can understand their tactics, techniques, and procedures. You can understand their tradecraft. You can figure out what malware they're using. You can understand what 0 days they're seeking to exploit. You can figure out their whole tool set. And with that whole tool set, you're able to build better defenses against that adversary in the real networks. So it's a growing trend of kind of this middle ground. So again, I'll just continue with the theme here at MITRE. At MITRE, we've got about 1,500 cybersecurity professionals that support pretty much almost every federal agency, I think. We have major programs with DHS CISA on the defensive side. We've got major programs with various intelligence agencies on the offensive side. We support U.S. Cyber Command. And then we do defensive cyber work for, again, many of the different federal agencies and their sort of CIO type organizations. Here at MITRE, we've kind of distilled down all of our expertise into what's called the MITRE attack framework, which is something that I encourage everybody to check out. It's increasingly something that employers are interested in people being familiar with, and it's become sort of the de facto standard for talking about adversary threats. You can check that out by going to attack.mitre.org. It's a great resource. There's a whole bunch of different things you can, in and of itself is really just a knowledge base that talks about different hackers, different bad guys that out there, different nation state hacker threats, different criminal hacker groups. And it talks about not so much specific instances of hacking, but really their approach to hacking in general. And so again, that's I think a useful resource, and a lot of organizations are planning their defensive strategies around better understanding the adversary's attack strategies. But of course, we're always hiring. Feel free to check out our careers page. And I've got, I mean, under my group, I've got a whole group that's focused on cyber solutions and architecture and research and design. I've got another group that's all cyber ops, both defensive cyber ops and offensive cyber ops. And then I've got a third group that's focused exclusively on critical infrastructure, because US critical infrastructure is under threat. Russia and China are doing everything they can to hack our energy infrastructure, our rail infrastructure, our ports, our natural gas pipeline infrastructure. And in particular, China wants to do this because if and when they invade Taiwan, they plan to basically throw a huge cyber punch at the US to cripple our ability to respond militarily. And this is something that I personally am very concerned about. I'm trying to figure out how MITRE can help solve on behalf of the nation. So we've got a whole bunch of work out there trying to figure out how to really shore up our everything from our energy grid to our rail infrastructure to protect against what could be one of the largest cyber attacks the world's ever seen in a few years. So with that, I see Austin's back on, so I guess I should wrap up. It was great to chat with everyone, and thanks for the thoughtful questions.